Hello, everyone. It is week 2. So excited to be able to talk about this week's content with you, which is the social construction of mental illness. I first just wanted to start off by saying I was very impressed with your responses in week 1, discussing the sociological perspective. Great job pulling on citations and also weaving in those personal experiences. I really love that. I always think it makes for more personal and engaging kind of a dialogue, right? So excellent job there. Going forward, I'd really love to continue to see you utilize direct citations to support your points, whether that's in the discussion questions or your reaction posts, okay? So great work. We're moving into week 2, and this week we'll be talking about the social construction of mental illness. So let's get into the mini lecture. So today I will be going over 2 key concepts. The first one is the social construction of reality, which is a foundational sociological concept that is going to really carry over into discussing mental health. And in relation to that, we'll be talking about medicalization. So first, I'll start off with the social construction of reality. So right here, I have $20, right? If I took this lighter and I lit this on fire, what would the response be? Some might say I have lots of money to blow. I don't. I am still a graduate student. So it would be like, why are you lighting money on fire, right? But isn't this just a piece of paper? Like, what would be the difference between lighting that on fire and this on fire? This is just like a printout from somewhere from the other day, right? Why is this so much more valuable than this? Are they not both just pieces of paper? Well, no, they're actually not. And that's because as a society, we have constructed a certain kind of meaning attached to this. The same way that we have attached meaning to the American flag or a crucifix. There are certain symbols and ideas, and it goes beyond even just physical things, right? That become embedded in the way that we perceive reality. And so when we talk about social construction of reality, we're really talking about habit, okay? So I have a quote to share with you. Habitualization describes how any action that is repeated frequently becomes cast into a pattern, which can then be performed again in the future in the same manner and with the same economical effort. Not only do we construct our own society, but we also accept it as is because others have created it before us. Society is in fact habit. And so an example I love to often share just to kind of simplify this concept is what colors do we assign to gender, right? We often say that pink is for girls and blue is for boys. Huh? Why? At what point did colors become gendered? Well, our society has decided that is how it works, right? However, in different cultures and societies, that is not the case. And that helps us, right, kind of get to like the socially constructed fabric of society when we see, hey, this kind of isn't that universal. And so when we talk about mental health, the reason why we want to talk, I'm sorry if you hear that in the background, that's my dog. We want to talk about the social construction of reality is to say, what is considered normal behavior, and at what point do certain behaviors become pathologized or considered a mental disorder, right? And because of that, we have to really, and what I'm most fascinated with is considering the potentially contentious politics at play when we begin to classify certain behaviors as mental disorders. Case in point, the book brings up homosexuality was once classified as a mental disorder. At one point in time, hysteria and women's behaviors of displaying emotion, right, was considered a mental disorder. And in fact, it kind of still is. We live in a very patriarchal society, and we'll take deeper dives when we talk about gender, right? And I'll provide some more examples as we talk about medicalization. And so I'm hoping that in this mini lecture, that is a sufficient kind of words, that is a sufficient explanation of what we mean by the social construction of reality. That as we continue to do society and people continue to have gender reveals and we continue to say, oh, it's a little girl, it has to be pink, it's a little boy, it has to be blue, we recreate that society, right? But if all of a sudden we switch things up, we switched colors, or we even just said, hey, we can dress our children in whatever colors they want, that might actually kind of lose some of its relevance. And we might even begin to kind of undo some of the gender norms that exist in our society. But we're not going to go too deep down that rabbit hole, right? It's just to really understand that through habit, through the actions, right, are partaking in certain behaviors, we recreate our society. And so how does that kind of lend itself to mental health? Well, case in point, what happens growing up in my household, right? This is a good question for you. What kind of behaviors were normalized for children? I know that I always heard growing up, like, little boys can't cry. Right? And it's not necessarily that if boys cried, they were considered to have a mental disorder yet. However, it was considered deviant, right? He's too emotional. You're supposed to kind of suck it up. And so it's interesting to think about what happens when you violate a social norm, right? So what are some of the social norms that exist in our society regarding mental health? Like, for instance, if we were to walk up to each other and I say, hey, how are you doing? Are you going to tell me how you're actually doing? Well, you might not, because it's not normal, right? To be like, well, you know what? I'm having an absolutely shit day. Excuse my French, right? I'm having an absolutely terrible day. I'm really depressed. I'm really not doing well. Maybe we're reaching that, like, getting to that point in some spaces, which is really awesome. But for the most part, we try to maintain this idea that everything's good, great, life's well, even if that's really not the case, right? So what kind of norms exist for displays of behavior? And how do those behaviors, if you will, get read by society, right? So if somebody is in the middle of the grocery store and just hysterically starts crying, we might say, there's something wrong with that person. But what if there's just something wrong with our society, right? Devil's advocate, or sociological perspective, if you will. What if we should just normalize displays of emotion more? What if that's actually not so pathological? But let's back up a little bit, okay? These are just some questions to kind of get you thinking through and understanding the concept of the social construction of reality, right? Is that we have norms that we've created by virtue of our society repeatedly doing those things, right? And so I kind of want us to think about what are the norms that exist when it comes to mental health, and what happens when you deviate from those norms, right? What is the response? So, this brings us to ask, like, what exactly is a mental disorder, right? What is normal? And what's pathological, and where do we draw the line, and who gets to define that, right? Psychiatry really lacks the biomarkers and tests, for an overwhelming majority of DSM recognized mental disorders. So that means it's often at the discretion of expert consensus to determine what is considered a mental disorder. And psychiatry is charged with understanding and treating contested conditions that fall on the border between deviant behavior and medical pathology. So at what point is a behavior just deviant, and when does it become, well, maybe this is actually a mental disorder, and who gets to decide that? And this is why it becomes especially interesting from a sociological perspective to say, yes, we do want to focus on mental health. We're not, sorry, I talk with my hands a lot and then the computer shakes. We do want to acknowledge the reality of mental health issues. And with that said, we also want to make sure we still make room for the social context. And so if we only focus on, for instance, mental distress, but we don't focus on the social kind of apparatus where that distress is forming, it doesn't really tell us the full story. What if that mental distress isn't so much of a disorder of the individual rather than a symptom of a disordered society, right? And as we go through the next few weeks, we'll kind of take deeper dives and think about that across lines of race, class, and gender. And we can continue to think about it in other areas. Those will be the primary areas we consider in this course because it's accelerated. So we want to think about what happens if we reduce mental distress and problems of the brain, like to problems of the brain, rather than thinking about the social origins and causes, right? And that's really, really important. Case in point, there's a very prevalent mental disorder that's been slapped on young Black and Latino boys, also girls, but more so males. And it's called oppositional defiance disorder, right? And so these youth are often cited with having unruly behavior, not really responding to authority, maybe bouts of aggression. And so, for one, there are totally political consequences for this, which is another focus of this course, right? Or what are the politics at play? Many of these youth are first slapped with that label and then later funneled through the school to prison pipeline into the prison industrial complex, which is, if I haven't already shared, that is like my area of specialty. I focus on the prison industrial complex heavily. And so thinking about that, right, how does that behavior being labeled as a disorder start a very traumatic and damaging process individually and collectively? How does that kind of influence people's life's outcomes? And so we really want to get critical here, right? So it's not like we're throwing out that mental health. It's not to say mental health is not real or that it's made up when we say the social construction of reality. It doesn't mean like we're just making things up. It means that as we create things, it's real in its consequences. And so the other term I want to talk about here, specific, right, to mental health, would be medicalization. And this is the process by which non-medical problems become defined and treated as medical in nature, usually in terms of illness and disorders. And evidenced in the exponential growth of the DSM, it is so thick now. It used to be like, I don't know, like this, and now it's like this, right? It just keeps growing and growing. And so that begs the question, are we continuing to pathologize behaviors that may be considered deviant in a given society? Or are we just now becoming more privy to things that may have been, if you will, disorders that we just didn't recognize in the past? I don't believe in binaries. I don't believe it's black or white. And so I really want us to kind of examine the gray area between those two poles. And so to wrap up with the mini lecture for this week, I really would like you to think about, and I would love for you to bring this into your discussions this week, is how has mental health been constructed in our society? And specifically, how was it framed in your family or in your culture? For me, I am mixed race. I'm half white and half black. And so my mother was always very kind of aware of mental health issues. She actually has mental illness. I grew up in a home with a mother who was mentally ill. She has schizoaffective disorder and major depressive disorder. Whereas my father was like, there's no such thing as mental illness. And that he's African American in the community. This is kind of shifting slowly. There's just this kind of like, it's just not a thing, right? And we can talk about the consequences of that too. And so I'd love to hear more about your own kind of socialization into mental health. Did it exist? Was it just something you had to pray about? What did it look like? What were discussions like? Were there any at all? How was mental health constructed in your world? How is it constructed in your world? And I'm really looking forward to the responses this week. Again, great job last week. Let's keep that momentum going this week. And I look forward to interacting with you digitally. Take care, everyone. And I do hope that this week, as we intellectualize mental health, we also practice it. And so this week, one thing I'll be doing from my mental health is being intentional about taking at least 30 minutes every day to meditate or be still and just rest. I work a lot. I am teaching 3 classes this semester. I work for a union part-time, and I'm working on my dissertation. And so it's really, really important that I slow down. And this is one of my favorite slogans, that rest is resistance. We'll talk about this more when we get into the week on capitalism. Let me stop it here because I could start a whole nother lecture. But thanks so much, everyone. I wish I could actually engage with you. These digital lectures are fun, but it's not as fun as being in a classroom environment. I know that your forum responses, though, will be so enlightening and so intriguing. So take care, everyone. Please remember to do one thing for your mental health this week, and feel free to share it with the class if you'd like. Bye.